You're listening to the Jim Richards Podcast from News Talk 1010.
There is a store in question here in Toronto. It's called Islamic Books. It's on Gerrard Street in the East End. It has a book on its shelves called A Gift for Muslim Couples. And our guest to the program this afternoon, Eric Brazo, purchased one of these books where you can find specific instructions on how to beat your wife. The book is meant to be a gift for newlywed Muslim couples on how to successfully have a Muslim relationship. The book contains Quranic interpretations and citations to back each one of its teachings. Eric Brazo was in the bookstore and picked it up. We talked to the owner of the bookstore. He declined to be interviewed for this show about this issue and asked us not to contact him again in the future. We thank Eric Brazo for coming in. Again, the book is called A Gift for Muslim Couple. And Eric, thanks for your time.
Good afternoon, Jim. Good afternoon to your listeners.
So what were you doing in a store looking for a book for a Muslim couple?
Well,
were you looking for a wedding gift or something?
Not exactly. I have a friend who's up in the Gerrard area, and I passed by the bookstore, and, killing some time, I walked in to kind of browse around, and I saw a book, this one, right on the shelf, picked it up, looked through the index, and I was surprised to see what I saw, so I purchased it.
Yeah. And in reading it, I'll read some of the things, and then we'll talk about them.
Sure.
Some of the more
egregious.
Egregious things. So, on conjugal relations between spouses, conjugal relations between spouses is one of the lover and the beloved. If the need should arise, it might be necessary, the book says, to restrain with strength or even threaten her. However, one should observe the limits and one should see that he does not become unjustly cruel.
That's interesting, don't you think? That brings us back to relativism. What is relatively love or relative cruel? Or something is right or something is wrong. But here in today's society in Toronto and Canada, we have, multiculturalism, and you're okay and I'm okay as long as you do what you do and I do what I do. And no longer is there any sense of, well, that crosses a line and we just won't accept it. Now, do we accept? I know you don't, I don't, but does Canada accept some version of what this book is saying here?
Well, and I think it gets into an important place where when young girls in Montreal go to get some help from authorities and then people who turn the other cheek and pretend that these girls aren't being harassed, if not beaten by their father, later to be found dead in a canal because we have set up a situation where as a society, we're okay with multicultural groups doing whatever they want, and then when something goes too far, everybody's like, where does that come from? Well, maybe it comes from when Eric, by the way, found this book and he brought it to Bob Ray. What did Bob Ray and his people say?
What Bob Ray and his people said was, well, this book is just a religious text. Oh, and by the way, the Bible has some very bizarre passages as well. So who are we to judge? And all religions are good and they're all bad in their own special way.
Let me get to some more, I think, more of the egregious stuff in this book. Page 45, the rights of the husband over the wife. Some of the examples include, she cannot leave the husband's house without permission. No, not to refuse when he calls for intercourse. And finally, she should not call him by his first name when calling him. Page 79, a summary of a wife's rights. One of the examples includes to refrain from beating her excessively. Let me go on and finish a couple of things that are in this book again. A gift for a Muslim couple that we found at a bookstore, or Eric found at a bookstore on Gerrard Street called Islamic Books. Page 89. It is not only the right of the wife that she should be supplied with financial support, but she's also entitled to be pleased and happy. Treat them with kindness for they are like prisoners in your care.
The interesting thing here is everything you're reading is, in a sense, setting up a paradigm where a man is doing his wife a service if he doesn't beat her too egregiously or too hard. So when a woman wants to leave her home, if her husband is kind, he will say, yes, darling, you can. But of course, he can easily say not. So could you imagine that in today's Toronto, we have 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 12-year-old little Islamic Muslim girls who are learning that this is the starting point of a relationship. This is ground zero.
Page 128, punishment, women and the manner to discipline them, to scold verbally, to beat by hand or stick, to pull by the ear, to use harsh words, or to restrain financially on ways to discipline, punishment, women, and the manner to discipline them. That is the heading that is under. You forgot the jurists have clearly pronounced or prohibited explicit beatings of the kind which leave marks. You're not supposed to leave marks on the woman's face, especially because that will make her, unattractive and ugly. That is also in the book. So this, folks, is being sold. And again, when Eric brought this to Bob Ray's attention, or at least to his people's attention, they suggested that they didn't necessarily have a problem with it, that there are, weird things in every single religion. But I would suggest to you, going back to the story, the terrible ending that we saw in Kingston in a canal when these young girls did go for help, that we have a society that will turn away from a young woman who might be of a different faith because somebody doesn't want to be judgmental and somebody doesn't want to be seen as being racist, as to suggest you cannot do that in this country. We do not stand for that in this country. Let's not forget a girl by the name of Asqua Parvez. She also was a young girl in school. She did seek help, but everyone just sent her back home to be with her family. There is an Islamic bookstore on Gerrard Street that is selling a book called A Gift for Muslim Couple. It is a book, and it effectively instructs the male partner in the Muslim couple on how to discipline his wife, including parts that say verbally scold, beat by hand or stick. The jurists have clearly prohibited explicit beatings of the kind that would leave marks. And it goes on to say, treat them with kindness, for they are like prisoners in your care. Certainly, I would suggest that this kind of stuff is a little disturbing. In the least, it's a little disturbing, especially when you think that we have had issues where women have been killed here in Toronto, in Canada, in the name of religion. So is this a strain of a specific religion, or is this the religion? Either way, it's here and alive and doing very well here in Canada. Jim, I'd like to just read a passage here that you forgot to read. This is one of the better ones. When a wife is very young, even to the extent that she is unable to have sexual relations but is mature enough to live with the man, she should amuse him and perform some tasks for him. So how young does a girl have to be before she cannot have sexual relations but still be married to a man? Is that not pedophilia, perhaps? Again, we approached the people who are selling this book, and they told us not to contact them again in the future and didn't have anything that they wanted to say on this matter. Here's Richard on News Talk 1010. Richard?
How did a book like that get on a store shelf in this country?
That's a very good question, because when I spoke to the police and I spoke to Bob Ray's office, I said, I remember 10 years ago, there was the Little Sisters bookstore in Vancouver. They were talking about a lesbian relationship. I don't know if you remember that. They held up that book at Canada Border Services, but not this book.
That's backwards.
I would suggest that that's probably right. Now, I want to address one thing that you said. I don't know. This sounds like the typical line, but I don't know the Muslim people that I know, anybody who practices the faith such as this, but I'm not also naive enough to think that this isn't a part of the Muslim community in the city. Well, it's like when you have a garden, you have a lot of nice flowers that you can see, but it only takes a few weeds to come in and choke everything out. So we have to ask ourselves, what part of the Islamic culture is this 5%, 10%, 20%? We don't know. So is it only 5 women a year or 10 women a year who are actually being subjective to these ideologies? Even one is too many, I think. I would agree. Here's Tarek Fatah, who, of course, has his fantastic weekend show here on News Talk 1010. Tarek, you weren't all that surprised when Britt showed you this book, I'm guessing?
Not at all. In fact, I've seen some worse books. I bought one book from that store that said that was dedicated to explaining why women will end up in hell. And it's very disappointing because this is not what most Muslims adhere to, but even if a fair share of them do, it's very scary.
What does it mean to anyone listening to know that this book is in English and isn't in a different language from a country where somebody came from?
Well, because some of these books are given as presents at weddings to new couples, and the second-class status of women is being pronounced not by men, but by some Islamist women in the community. There are private schools where, in Mississauga, where women are being asked to, middle-class women are being asked to resign from their jobs, go home, and allow their husbands to take a second wife so they could have more Muslim children. It's a very bizarre system that is far more orthodox and conservative than what I'd seen in either Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, where I've lived.
Eric, I'd like to ask you a question. This is Eric, by the way.
Yes.
Good afternoon. What is the percentage, or what would be the number of people or community that actually aspires to this type of ideology?
I can tell you one thing. Most of the immigrants who come here don't, but their children do. And those born in this country are far more liable to do this. I'll just give you the example of France. It wasn't Mohammed Mer's parents who did this. This was a Frenchman born in France, very hip, but he freaked out. That was the logical end of indoctrination against Western society.
Tarek.
What you found in the bookstore is a different path, but again, it is a rejection of Western society, its values and its cultures.
Yep.
Which is at the root of this.
Tarek, we got to run. I don't know if you heard that Eric brought this over to Bob Ray's people, and they kind of just summarily dismissed it, which is obviously part of the problem in this country that you've addressed several times.
It is because the problem is until the liberal left takes on this as their issue, nothing is going to be resolved. That's the predicament we are in, because the right wing has such a terrible record at being anti-immigrant that everything, even when they do something right, is taken in that spirit. So the track records of the two sides of our politics are such that unless and until the left takes up this issue and fights this bizarre, not bizarre is not the word, scary development in our society, we will see more of this.
Tarek, thank you very much for your time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Tarek Fatah here on News Talk 1010. Again, we're talking about a book. It's called A Gift for a Muslim Couple. It was purchased here in Toronto on Gerrard Street at a bookstore called Islamic Books. Essentially, it talks about how you may restrain your partner if she's uncooperative in sex, and the way that you can go about beating her, what is acceptable to use your hand and or stick.